In 2025, Columbus Zoo gave the world another reason for people to visit. For the last couple of years, they were in the process of reimagining their North America zone, its second largest and its oldest animal section, dating back to the spring of 1985. Even though some species have left in recent years, it still has one of the most impressive collections to represent America's woodlands. After 40 years, they changed the name to North America Trek, and about half of its animals received new and bigger homes, while the other half will get the same treatment in the near future. For today's episode, we're going to walk through this exhibit like we normally would, but near the end, I will show you what these new features used to look like. I'll show you what they didn't change, and channel members will get to hear what I actually think of North America Trek. Now, if you want to get a better understanding of North America's backstory, I highly recommend that you watch my full episode of the old attraction first. Now, before anyone does anything else, I want to see who can be the first to identify this species that will appear in the next episode. Our new trek will start in one of the most peaceful ways that you can possibly begin any exhibit, a walk-through aviary filled with songbirds and waterfowl. While locals might not think of these animals as exotic, it's still a treat to see these species that could be living in your own backyard, ones that you might not even realize are there. This new exhibit fills the role of the old Songbird aviary that's located at the end of the original trail. The old one was still intact, so we'll be able to check it out later. Now you might be thinking, this one's looking a little empty. Not just with the foliage, but with the animals as well. I did overhear that they were slowly introducing birds from the old exhibit to this one. As for the plants, well, that's usually what you get with new zoo attractions, and you just gotta wait for the greenery to come in, even if it takes years. Immediately after the Songbird section is a second walkthrough aviary. This time, you are sharing the space with birds that are a little bit bigger than a songbird, a pair of trumpeter swans. At 20 to 30 pounds, it's the heaviest kind of waterfowl and the heaviest bird that's native to North America. They're also part of one of the greatest comeback stories in wildlife history. After nearly going extinct in the early 1900s, protections, regulations, and reintroduction programs were enough to bring them back. Now, this aviary might not be as diverse as the first one, but I think it's just so much better in terms of naturalism. And the pond settled against what I assume is supposed to be a cabin, it makes it look just so inviting enough to want to live in. Going across the path is this North America's most charismatic mammal, a long, multi-layered display for river otters. Another species with another comeback story, but this time it took place in Ohio. They almost disappeared in the state in the 50s, reintroduction programs kicked in the 80s, and otters were actually moved from southern states to East Ohio. It paid off because in 2002, the river otter was removed from the Ohio Endangered Species list. You'll find later that these otters used to live in an old display designed for grizzly bears. Now, unlike that display, we finally had the chance to be able to see them swim underwater, not in one area, but in two. And unlike that last exhibit, we can also see them without an annoying glare from the glass. I wouldn't say it's the best overall otter exhibit I've ever seen, but this might be my favorite one for river otters. Just like how North America Trek has one of my favorite bald eagle habitats. And much like the Songbird aviary, it has some growing to do in the green department. It'll get there. It'll get there. Anyways, 99% of the time, if you see a bald eagle in a zoo, it's a rescue, which is true here, as you can tell because this one's beak isn't looking too good. Normally, those rescued eagles have a wing injury or something that prevents them from flying well or hunting on their own, and they might be displayed in something open-topped like this. Columbus has always put their eagles in an aviary, allowing them to fly as much as they possibly can. And not only did they continue that with North America Trek, we can walk through the middle of the habitat and watch or hear these raptors fly from one side of the enclosure to the other, right over our heads. Almost every bit of this North America trek covers forests and wetlands, but our next stop offers a glimpse at the country's southwestern terrain, home to the smallest of North America's subspecies of the gray wolf, the Mexican wolf. Similar to a lot of our wildlife friends so far, the world hasn't been so fair to them, and they're still looking for their comeback story. We almost completely lost these wolves in the mid-1900s. The last of their kind were bred in managed care, some were reintroduced into their native range, and this process still goes on today. But less than 300 Mexican wolves are in the wild. Now, if you'd like to help out in some way on this video, I did set up a campaign that lets you donate to the Wolf Conservation Center, and if you would like to learn more about the organization, I left links in a comment below. This wolf pack took over this hillside that was previously trampled by two hoofed mammals that have since been phased out of the zoo's collection. For a zoo that is well known for its theming, North America didn't have as much of it as I would expect outside of these facades by the moose and this cabin viewing shelter. So adding that handcrafted waterfall just makes this area all the more immersive, and it will look even better when those pines get big enough to hide the fence. One area of the zoo that I always skipped was the Habitat Hollow building because it looked like a place for families to take their kids to just run around a playground and scream. Based on this shaky video, it was actually this kind of immersive walkthrough of a dark recreated wilderness, and honestly, I kind of regret never visiting, but I much prefer what they did to the place. Now it's the Ohio Center for Wildlife Conservation. It's no longer an immersive experience, and it has a much more modern aesthetic, but it's about as educational as an exhibit can possibly get. Every single wall and apparently every single door has some sort of informative graphic. 3 walls cover everything you need to know about mussels. Another highlights their sister park's American Burying Beetle Recovery Program, but as far as live animals go, for the last 2 decades, the zoo has also played a crucial role in saving plains garter snakes, whose habitats are disappearing in Ohio. They breed, tag, and release them, and so far over 400 snakes have graduated from this program. And they do something similar with their hellbenders, North America's largest salamander. They participate in the Ohio Hellbender Partnership to help collect eggs from the wild, raise them safely in labs like this, hand rear the salamanders, and also microchip and release them into Ohio waters. Since 2012, over 2,000 hellbenders have made their way back to their natural habitat. But that's not all there is to this area. Behind the Conservation Center is a very small example of what a true wetlands looks like. And the point of this, like every other zoo attraction, is to show how important this kind of ecosystem is to wild locals like this little guy. I know I said I would go over North America Trek's changes at the end of the video, but because it's right here, I do have to point out that the Bob Evans barn doesn't appear to have had any renovations. It still has cattle, a lot of personable goats, and a very large contact yard. Which brings us to our final major change to this old but still respected region. And the grand finale of this Phase 1 was reserved for black bears. If you're a regular visitor here, if you've been to the zoo at all, your first impression of this new exhibit should be, wow, this is a massive improvement over what they used to live in. They have a proper pool, which by the way, that rock formation and waterfall is actually the back half of the waterfall on the Mexican wolf side, so they definitely killed 2 birds with 1 stone there. The bears now also have at least 3 times more room, which allowed them to have at least 3 times more vertical space. And I always remembered the old viewing area not being the best because it was partially covered half of the time, but now it's almost impossible to miss them, even if the windows do fog up every cold morning. But if the bears aren't feeling the crowd, they do have a very glary den to get just a little bit of privacy. Even though the new stuff is over with, I know there are a couple of you who are familiar with this area and are wondering, what does the rest of the old North America look like? While going off of my 2021 visit, the former Timberwolf exhibit had a Canada lynx for a few years. They were moved, and now this contains red foxes. Wolverines were moved to the old black bear yard, which I think is a much better home for them. Going next door, the aforementioned grizzly bear / river otter display was emptied this September. The moose were still there. No sign of the sandhill cranes though. The reindeer didn't fly away. The mountain lions stayed put, but the Canada lynxes took the wolverine spot in the log cabin. Fortunately, I was able to make one last walkthrough of the old Songbird Aviary. It was one of my favorite areas in the park, and I hope it stays or it's repurposed for phase 2. And finally, after that, the remaining bald eagle and beaver habitats were demolished, which means as of a few months ago, you had to backtrack from the flight cage. Now, the next time you hear me talking about this part of North America, you will have to wait for the tour in 2028. Now, with the complete walkthrough over, we're going to go back to the very beginning of the trail, and I'm going to point out all of the changes that the zoo made within North America Trek. First of all, there was no arch, just this sign, and honestly, I much prefer the arch. Back in the day, like a couple of years ago, it began with the Mexican wolves. The experience was very similar. You could get really close to them. Their enclosure I thought was fantastic. And during the peak of summer, it was so lush that it was impossible to see them sometimes. Today, that space is now where the otters and eagles are. To make the new Songbird Aviary, they had to bulldoze one of the elephant yards, the one that I don't think anyone will miss. So to compensate for this loss, they gave them extra access to the old rhino yard. The trumpeter swans actually stayed put, but they were not in a walkthrough aviary, and their old space looked so natural, as if the birds had free range around the zoo. About 15 or so years ago, the otters lived in the last exhibit, which was arguably the weakest part of North America. It looks like it was an improvised afterthought. And like I said, the otters moved to the old grizzly bear space. As you might have seen, the eagles were in a large flight cage just before the beavers, and for being a 36-year-old exhibit, I still think it was a solid home, but it also has been demolished for future development. Back to the wolves. The hillside once belonged to bison and pronghorn, but like I implied, sadly, they were phased out. Although you can still see bison at the Wilds, the zoo's sister attraction that's 90 miles east from here. And lastly, the black bears are now in the spot of the old camel and pony ride station, and even the prairie dog spot, who will definitely be missed. But honestly, even with them gone, it was just nice to see the bears get a much bigger and better home. Next on Zoo Tours, we're actually going to stay right here in Columbus, but rather than walk through just one part of the zoo, I'm going to show off each of its 10 sections to get anyone prepared if they ever want to make a visit, and more importantly, for people who won't ever be able to make a visit. Then, for episode 200, we're going back to New York City, not to Manhattan, not to the Bronx, but to Queens, for a full, not so brief walkthrough of their entire zoo. So as always, please stay tuned for our next adventure. Stay wild, and thank you all for watching Zoo Tours.